Hello, and welcome to Living Well, your show for information and inspiration to improve your health and wellness. My name is Karen Fabian, and I am your host. Thank you so much for watching. We have an interesting show for you today. We're going to start out with our Ask the Expert segment, and I'm going to bring out Christy Kuhn. Christy is an experienced yoga teacher with a background in anatomy, and she'll be walking us through some of the negative effects of sitting and hunching all day. And I know this is something we can all relate to. And we'll be talking a little bit about some of the things you can do to counteract the negative effects of this unhealthy posture. In our Inspiring Story segment, we'll meet Julie Gillespie. And Julie is a local mom and the mother of beautiful Jasmine. And while Jasmine is doing just wonderfully now, her birth was filled with some challenge as she came several months early. And Julie's going to be walking us through what happened, some of the resources that she used, and some of the lessons she learned. And even though her story is pretty specific to her situation, some of the lessons that she learned, I think, are applicable to us all. If you're watching us on the Boston Neighborhood Network, thank you so much for watching. After every show, I post a link to the show on my YouTube channel, Bare Bones Yoga, so anyone can watch it anytime, anywhere. I'd like to thank the show's major sponsor, Yoga Reaches Out, which is an amazing nonprofit that uses money raised at yoga events around the country to support children's charities. And I'd also like to thank my friends at Zoomies Coffee, 221 Main Street in Charlestown, for being a big supporter of the show. Please visit them. So let's begin with our first segment. Christy, come on. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Thank you for having me.
Sure thing. So I was saying in the intro, the negative effects of sitting and hunching all day. And I know, even as yoga teachers, we can relate to that too. It's not like we're doing yoga poses all day.
Yes.
So I brought Mr. Bones here so that we can show our viewers some of the joints involved in sitting and hunching. So maybe you can kind of walk us through that.
Sure. So maybe we'll start at the top and work our way down. One joint that the slouching and hunching affects is definitely our shoulder joint.
Yeah.
That internal rotation of the shoulder, and the shoulders hunching forward. The chest as well, the area of the rib cage collapses in.
Yep.
We also, let's go down the front of the body, the hip joints as well, from sitting in that constant flexed position. And then if we turn around and look at the back of the skeleton, hunch posture definitely affects the entire length of your spine.
Something like this.
Exactly.
Okay.
As well as the whole shoulder girdle. When you think about those shoulders hunching forward, the shoulder blades spread apart.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Yeah. So it really affects the entire body when you think about it. The entire spine, the shoulders, hips, shoulder girdle.
So not so healthy for the muscles to be always in one shape, right?
No. That creates a lot of tension, a lot of shortening and tightening in the front body, all the muscles across the front of the shoulders, front of the chest, front of the ribs, front of the hips.
Got it.
And causes a lot of weakness and overexpression in the muscles in the back. So those muscle imbalances over time can lead to a lot of discomfort and pain in the body.
Okay.
And your muscles wind up, because of that weakness and tightness, when you do try to sit up tall, your muscles have to work even harder to try to bring you there.
Yeah, because they really haven't been used to do their job, as we like to say. Okay.
Exactly.
So are there certain, most of the time we're sitting and hunching at our desks. Are there certain shapes that people can take even throughout their workday?
Yeah, shapes to counter the effects of hunching. Great. So one thing I suggest to my clients is some dynamic stretches. So the idea of not going too deep when you're sitting on a desk all day, but bringing some movement to gradually warm up and open the body. So something as simple as bringing the arms overhead. And then bending the elbows and drawing the arms back behind you. And then bringing the breath in with that. So inhaling up and exhaling back. We'll do that 2 more times.
Yeah,
and this is great.
Stretch for the chest.
Especially with the hunched posture, tends to shorten the front of the rib cage, so we don't get to breathe as deeply. Let's do 1 more time.
Yeah.
And this time, Karen, why don't you clasp your arms behind your back?
Okay.
And hug your upper arms in towards one another and really broaden across your chest and your collarbones.
Yeah, and I even brought one of these because I had an anticipation that you might show me that.
Yes.
So I could even do it this way.
And this is especially helpful to use a strap or even a belt from your pants
Yeah.
to open up the chest, especially if your shoulders are really tight and it's hard to move away from that, slouched posture. But when the hands are wider and you have that strap, you have a little more room to open up the front of your body.
So what about the hips?
For the hip joint, one great thing you could do is a little bit of a low lunge stretch. So I'll have you come down, onto one knee, and you want to make sure that your right knee, we don't want to go too past the toes there. You want to make sure the knee is protected. And you can start with your hands on your front right thigh or even on your hip. And maybe when you inhale, just back out of the stretch a little bit, and then exhale, bend into the stretch. So again, dynamic so that there's movement.
And then I could add arms maybe.
For more of a challenge, you'll get a little challenge to your balance. Clasping them behind your back. So you get the heart opening, the chest, shoulder opening along with the hip opening. And it's and yoga provides, the opening, the strengthening, the stretching simultaneously, which is really nice.
Nice. So one more thing before we go, I wanted to give a shout out to a really nice, really well-known, wonderful yoga teacher, Jill Miller, and she has these yoga tune-up balls, which I think are really good for different kind of self-massage. So you could even
great. So you can even go into the meat. These are the upper traps here, which tend to get overexpressed and also overworked, because when your upper body is slouching forward, these muscles work extra hard to keep your head up. Right? If you're looking at a computer screen. So you can even have someone or do this yourself along the meaty part of your upper back. I also use this on the front of my chest. I mean, there's not as much meat there, so you want to be careful not to press too hard. But I also find it's helpful at times to go along the meaty part of your pectoral muscles.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming. I love sharing this, especially because it's such a practical tip. We're certainly doing a lot of this sitting and hunching all day.
Exactly.
Excellent. Thank you.
Karen.
Stay tuned for our next segment, our inspiring story, coming up next.
Congrats on paying off all those student loans.
Finally, right?
I'm kind of living paycheck to paycheck right now.
Well, have you tried saving?
Bill collectors, they're the worst. Am I right?
When it comes to financial stability, don't get left behind. Get tools and tips for saving at feedthepig.org.
Hi, and welcome back. Our next segment is our Inspiring Stories segment, and on several of our shows, I like to share with you the stories of people and some challenges that they've faced in their lives. And even though, as you're watching this particular segment, you may not have gone through this particular situation, I always like to draw from stories that have general themes that we can all learn from. So I'd like to introduce you to Julie Gillespie. Hi, Julie.
Hi.
Julie is a local mom, and Julie and her husband Jeff learned that she was pregnant back in May of 2012. And by the time Christmas arrived, Julie experienced an episode that led to the birth of her beautiful daughter, Jasmine. And Jasmine was born at only 27 weeks, so she was quite early. The initial phases of her birth and her growing were filled with a lot of challenges and concerns and fears. And we're going to dive into a little bit about what happened and some of the lessons that Julie and her husband have learned. So welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you for coming, because I know this is a tough story for you to go through. And we've had a couple of preliminary conversations, and I can, kind of hear in your voice just the sense of concern about sharing this. So I really appreciate you sharing it with our viewers.
Thank you.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about what happened?
Sure. So as you said, I was 27 weeks pregnant, and we, on a Saturday morning, were walking around Costco, and I had some abnormal cramping in my back and in my abdomen, but we were getting ready for a Christmas party that night, and we had just moved to our new house. So kind of a combined Christmas party and housewarming party. But I felt really sluggish and tired. And when we got home, I was vacuuming. And then when the friends came over, I was setting the table, and I felt, periodic cramps in my back. And I just sat down and rested for a few minutes in between setting the table and doing things. And my friend came over and she said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm fine. It's just a regular pregnancy symptom, I'm sure." And then I kind of joked and I said, "I wonder if this is what labor feels like," having no idea that I would be going into the hospital very soon. But I took a rest later on, and I went up to the bathroom, and that's when I had seen some blood. So I called my mom, who is a retired NICU nurse. And
ICU, neonatal ICU nurse, right?
And I said, "Mom, I have some blood. This is probably no big deal, right?" And she said, "No, you need to go to the emergency room now." And I said, "Okay, are you sure we're not being alarmist about this?
Right.
And it's just a normal thing?" And she said, "No, go to the emergency room now." So I was a little bit upset because she was kind of concerned. So I knew something was wrong. And then at that point, my husband came upstairs and he saw me crying. He's like, "What's going on?" And I just I handed the phone to him, and Mom explained, "You need to get her to the emergency room." So we left our friends at the party to finish the party, and God bless them. They finished the party and they cleaned up and everything like that. But we did say we'll be back in a few hours to help finish the party with you. And then as we were driving down to Newton Wellesley, was the first hospital we were at, we started timing how the cramps were going. And we started talking and we said, well, isn't there a word called preterm labor or something like that? Being our first child, we had no idea about what a regular delivery would be like, let alone a preterm delivery. And so we said, yeah, let's Google it. So we're Googling it, and my husband's timing in between, I guess what they were at the time were contractions that we didn't know they were contractions, but they were 5 minutes apart. And as we started reading the Google hit, sure enough, everything that they were looking at, everything we were looking at, it fit our description. But then when we got to Newton Wellesley, they said, 99% of the cases that present like you, there's usually some dehydration involved, and have you been drinking enough and all that stuff. And we said yes. But then the OB/GYN on duty, she took a look and she was surprised, and I was already 4 to 5 centimeters dilated.
Which is pretty advanced.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we were pretty shocked. And 5 hours later, they decided, after getting some drugs into me to help develop the baby's lungs, et cetera, they decided, let's try and do this as a natural birth. So we started the process.
Okay.
And out comes the cord first. So I had a cord prolapse. And the doctor looks up at me and she says, the umbilical cord is coming out first. And, I didn't know what that actually meant. But she said, because of this, we have to do an emergency C-section. So she jumped at the end of the bed,
Oh my.
held the baby in, held the cord in, and they wheeled me really fast into the operating room.
And what were you thinking at this point?
Yeah, I put my hand over my forehead and I just said, wow, this is not what I signed up for. I don't really know what's going on. And when we went into the emergency room or operating room, there were lights everywhere. There were 12 people garbed up already, ready to go. And I thought, wow, this is really serious. I can't take this. And I tried to breathe a little bit. And then at that point, they started the surgery and started cutting my stomach. But
Where was your
yeah, my husband wasn't there yet. So I said, where is Jeff? Where is Jeff? And they brought him in. And once he got in, 15 seconds later, they brought Jasmine out. And then they rushed her over to, I didn't get to see her, they rushed her over to a team of neonatologists. And they intubated her, put a breathing tube in, and checked her APGAR scores and just stabilized her generally.
So these are just some tests they do to kind of check her out initially.
Yeah, to make sure she's stable. And Jeff got to go see her for the first time, and he came back in tears. And I said, "What's wrong?" And he just said, "Julie, she's really small, and I'm scared." But me and my infinite wisdom, I had a lot of drugs on board. I said, "Oh, honey, it'll be fine. They do wonders with these little babies." And I had no idea what I was saying. So then at that point, we went into another hospital room so that while they stabilized her more, we went into another hospital room. And at that point, they brought her in an incubator and let me see her for the first time. I didn't get to touch her. But then they quickly whisked her away in an ambulance to Children's. And at that point, we stayed for an extra hour, and then they took me away in my own ambulance down to Children's. But they didn't have room for both of us. And I stayed in Brigham and Women's, just across a long hallway from Children's. So then we were at Children's for the next 28-ish days.
Okay.
And at that point, she was doing well. She was stabilized.
Okay.
And after about 36 hours, they removed her breathing tube and put her on what they called a CPAP, which is a device just to help with continuous airflow to keep the breathing tubes open or your lungs open, which is a good sign that she could transfer that soon. She was doing quite well. And then at that point, I was discharged about 5 days after, the normal stay after a C-section. I was discharged. And then we went home, Jeff and I. Jasmine stayed at the hospital because she wasn't well enough to go home. And we got home, and I thought, oh, this is odd. I don't have a baby in my tummy. She's at the hospital and it's just us. This doesn't feel right. And I remember just breaking down at the top of the stairs. I looked at her room and there was no baby going in there, and we were going back into our bedroom like nothing ever happened.
Right.
So it was a tough experience.
Maybe what we should do at this point, let's take a break.
Yep.
And we'll come back and we're going to dive into the second segment.
Okay.
Okay.
Sure.
All right. Stay tuned.
When I was 6, my mom had a stroke.
I'm Paul George. Learn the signs of a stroke fast.
F, face drooping. A, arm weakness. S, speech difficulty. T, time to call 911. Spot a stroke fast.
Hi, and welcome back. So we left off when you had arrived home and Jasmine was still in the hospital. So let's pick up from there. What happened next?
Okay, sure. So at Children's, they were really, really good about preparing us for the worst case scenario. And Jasmine had a upper grade 2, low grade 3 brain bleed.
Okay.
And so that was her major issue at that moment. And what they had to do was measure head circumference size, and it kept increasing.
Not good, which
Right.
is not good, right?
Right, so it was swelling. And it swelled so much to the point where they decided we needed to do something like a spinal tap on her. There's a different medical term for it. But what they did is they drained liquid from the brain area off through the spine. And most preemies, as I'm told, need many of those. She thankfully only needed one of those. And her head size was under control. And then at that point, we stayed, like I said, at Children's for about 4 weeks until she was medically safe enough to be transferred to a less severe unit, if you will. So we went to a unit at Newton Wellesley where they'd call it generally a feeding and growing unit, so that we could focus on doing just that. So we stayed there for 45 days, and our whole hospital stay was around 73 days. And so at that point, we were told that we were going to be discharged, and that's very exciting for us because we've been commuting back and forth to Children's, back and forth to Newton Wellesley, spending 9 and 10 hour days there just to be with her. So we were worried, though, at the same time to bring her home because you have this fragile 2-pound baby. As she started out, now I think she was about 4 or 5 pounds when we brought her home, maybe 6, I'm not remembering. So we finally had Jasmine home with us, and it was great because we could finally be parents. And the nurses were all wonderful. And at the same time, we felt like we just really wanted to take over all the care because at the hospital, the nurses and doctors, of course, they do all that. And so at that point, we were just really happy to have her home. And it was great. And the first thing we did when we brought her home is we said, here's your bedroom. And talked her through the house. It was really neat.
Gave her a little tour.
Yeah.
Well, now that we've kind of run through what happened, I know in some of our conversations before the show, you and I talked a little bit about some of the things that you've learned and some of the different feelings that came up for you. And one of the things that you shared with me was a feeling of guilt over what happened. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I wondered and I wondered and I wondered for the longest time, did I do something that spurred on the preterm birth? I wondered, did you have too much stress in your life? Did you drink too much coffee during your pregnancy? Did you take too many yoga classes or just try to take on too much, not sleep enough? And after a couple of years of researching and 3 different opinions, we learned that there was almost nothing I could have done about it. It ended up being a placental abruption due to an infection in the umbilical cord. And that infection was asymptomatic. So there was nothing to tell me that this is happening. But that took a long time to learn that. And before we learned all those facts, it was just very hard. And I kept beating myself up. What if I did this different? And what if I did that different? But in the end, I've learned, and I still struggle with it today, but I learned that, hey, let it go. It's fine.
Let yourself off the hook
kind
of thing.
Yeah.
What kinds of tools did you find helpful? I can imagine there must have been some really scary moments.
Yeah, so for us personally, there was a lot of personal prayer that we did, family prayer. That was the strongest driver for us to keep going and keep hope that she was going to be fine and be alive. We had a lot of friends support as well, and so we had people dropping off food at the house because when you're commuting back and forth every day to the hospital for that long of time, the last thing you have energy to do is make yourself a healthy meal.
Right.
So people did that for us. And then it seemed like every week maybe someone in our lives popped up and said, hey, I had a preterm birth as well.
Wow.
And we said, really? Right? So you learn about it, and we learned actually that it happens more often than you ever realize. And so many people go through it, but they don't really talk about it.
Yeah, yeah. What about, we haven't talked so much about today, Jasmine today, and how she's like today. Are there any residual challenges that she has because of her birth?
Yeah, so she has two things. The first diagnosis she has is called spastic diplegia, which is a mild form of cerebral palsy.
Okay.
And that type of cerebral palsy, you get a lot of stiffness in your hips, your legs, and your ankles. And so the treatment for her at this moment is that she's got AFOs, ankle foot orthotics.
Okay, something she wears on her legs.
Yeah,
Okay.
and they just go up below the knees, and it's to keep the the heels down more
Okay.
because she's so tight. And that may or may not work.
Okay.
We don't know yet. We're still learning, and we're still in this phase of how long are we going to see these effects? Because her walking, she walks, thankfully. She's a little bit wonky. It's cute, but she does have her hands up higher than normal.
Right.
And it's because of that condition, whereas most of us carry our arms down this way.
Sure.
And then she also has a pretty severe case of reflux. So
Something in the stomach, digestive
Yeah.
system.
And usually you outgrow that by about 2-ish, as I'm told. She still has it at 3, and we're learning how to manage that every day as well.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about the kind of child she is and just, kind of what you see going forward for her.
Yeah, so her characteristics, she's very happy. She's always smiling, and that's what everybody reports to us, which
Yeah.
is refreshing to hear. She's, of course, she's well mannered and nice.
Yeah.
She's 3. But for her future, we feel like she's weathered through a lot already in her life.
Sure.
And it's a clear sign to us that she's got a lot to offer. We don't know what it looks like, but
Yeah.
we feel like her purpose here is to do something great for someone. Again, we don't know what it looks like, but
Yeah.
we're here to support her every effort to try to find out what that purpose
Yeah.
is, because we believe there's something real there. Otherwise, she wouldn't have done as well.
Right.
That's how we think about it.
Something special.
Yeah,
Something
and-
special in her.
Yeah, that's right. And I think some of the things that helped us as well to bring her where she is today and have her be the way she is today, we had some strong support through Jewish Family Services.
Okay.
There's an organization called Fragile Beginnings, and Corinne Lindfors was amazing, and they helped with really the transition from out of the hospital into the home to help us manage that care. And I just wanted to mention the nurse when we delivered. Her name was Marla DeAngelis, and she was amazing. I didn't know how amazing she was at the time of delivery,
Right.
but she had her own preemie, and she was telling us her stories as we were delivering. And honestly, I felt like, okay, I don't think I'm going to need all this information, but I'm going to listen. Turns out today I needed every single bit of what she was telling us. So it was very...
She was like a little angel there on
Yep.
your shoulder.
Her name's DeAngelis.
Oh, right. Isn't that interesting?
Yep, so it was very divinely ordered, I feel.
Yes, yes. If someone's watching that has gone through this experience, even most recently, is there anything that you can share with them?
Yeah, I think advocating for your child in the hospital is very important because we were always in constant dialogue with the doctors and the nurses, so much so that we felt like we were a pain. But we really wanted to understand the diagnosis, understand the next treatment step, and really know it.
What's going on?
And I thought that was a really important thing that we did. So I'd advise you to ask questions
Right.
if you were a preemie mom, a lot of them, and don't worry about what the doctors and nurses think. That's why they're there. They're
Right.
happy to answer those questions. But also outside of the hospital, there's a strong advocating component as well, because when you come home, you might go into early intervention services that are offered by the state, and that's really another piece that helped Jasmine progress along so well. She's had a lot of treatments in speech, in her cognitive ability is now average with her peers. Speech is average. It's her physical therapy that's needed right now. So, but all of those services comes through early intervention. So make yourself aware of some of those resources.
Take advantage of
Yeah,
them.
and the hospital will offer them to you. You don't know everything that's coming at you or exactly what these services might look like for you, but take them because
Great.
that's really important.
Great, great. And I think that being an advocate piece is so important. Like, be the squeaky wheel.
Yeah, absolutely.
Be the
And
squeaky wheel.
really just celebrating the small successes.
Yep.
Because that's all you've got to hold on to at that moment when you wonder whether your baby's going to be, you know,
Right.
well
How
or
they're
not.
gonna do.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing this story. I really appreciate your honesty and coming on the show and sharing it. So thank
Sure.
you.
Thank you for having me.
Sure, sure. Well, that is our show for today. Thank you so much for watching. And don't forget, you can always watch the show on my YouTube channel, Bare Bones Yoga. Until our next show, live well.